If you're in the early years of motherhood and trying to give your children a beautiful education while also providing time to nurture yourself, check out the Peaceful Press resources. The Peaceful Preschool and Nourishing Nature Kindergarten both include simple daily activities with things around your house that really encourage motor skills and just a peaceful learning rhythm so that you and your children can bond. There can be a lot of connection, but there's also margin for you to take care of your physical and spiritual needs as well. And if you want a resource for nurturing spiritual formation in your family, check out the Good Gospel. It includes 26 Bible stories on the life of Jesus, along with crafts, memory verses, and some song suggestions. Resources like the Good Gospel, the Peaceful Preschool and Nourishing Nature Kindergarten, as well as my books, Mothering by the Book and Habits for a Sacred Home, are wonderful opportunities for you as a mom to feed your spirit, take care of your children while also having margin for rest. This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home podcast. This is the show where we talk about the peaceful path to connected families and restored communities. Today on the show, I'm so excited to be chatting with Emelie Pepito. We are talking this month on habits of order. This is the theme in the Restoration Home community where we're working on chore chart follow through this month and teaching our children how to make their beds and even doing an evening pickup so we can start the next day with joy. These habits are especially good as we're closing out the homeschool year. It can get so busy as we are going to co-op ending parties and turning in last assignments or finishing up art projects. And so learning how to have some habits of order this month is such a good practice. But today, Emily and I are actually going to talk about homeschooling with AI. I recently sent out an email about it. And then I kind of revised the ideas a little bit into a blog post because I'm also very wary of AI. I know so many people in the Restoration Home community and the Peaceful Press community are wary of AI. They're wondering what the impact is on the future. And Emily's done a little bit of research on that, and her thesis for her Juris Doctorate was on decentralized finance and cryptocurrency. And I'm also doing some research on it, mostly making Beatrix Potter images out of my pictures in ChatGPT. But I'm excited to chat with you today, Emily, about homeschooling with AI.
I'm really excited about this podcast. I think it's important for people to know whether or not they're afraid of it or they're using it quite a lot.
Yeah. So, what are the things we should be afraid of, in your opinion?
Having it dumb us down. I'm kind of joking. I think at this point, I think every family should be seeking to have technological Sabbaths, keeping their phones out of their bedrooms, being just generally privacy aware around your device. I don't think that AI significantly changes any of the concerns that are already ongoing around technology. I think the thing it does add is that we now have a generation who are having an important part of the research process abridged via AI. So now, rather than learning to go through a book or go through the web and compare and contrast sources and have this sort of research ability on the really technical side, I can go into AI and just type in a question and it's doing all of the research work for me, which is great. It's a good skill to have. I think knowing that you are losing a skill and implementing educational methods to compensate for that are really important. Like one thing you could do with your junior high schooler is if you have access to a library with encyclopedias, or if you have access to encyclopedias in your home, have a high schooler type into chat GPT, OpenAI, which is owned by OpenAI, or Grok, which is the X version, Perspectivity, which operates on multiple platforms. Have them type a question in there, like what was the population in China in 1945 and what led to the population explosion in China between 1945 and 1985. and see what ChatGPT gives as an answer, and then have your student go look through encyclopedias, do their own research on the web, and see if they come up with a different answer. See if there's things that they are learning from these other resources that ChatGPT is not giving them in an answer. And then you can have a discussion around it as a family, like which version is more correct, why would we have gotten this answer here and that answer there. You can use it as a really useful educational tool. I think letting your child simply have ChatGPT outline an essay, for instance, is going to cause your child to lose out on some really important skills in learning that are important, not because they can't use ChatGPT for that, but because if you don't understand how ChatGPT got there, you are actually going to have an abridged knowledge of, say, drafting an excellent essay or doing a geographical research problem, that kind of thing. So that would be some of my initial thoughts on it. The other thing is that, and I haven't looked into this personally, but I was listening to a podcast, and DeepSeek, from what I understand, has in their privacy that they are recording, their privacy policy, that they are recording and storing all information. And DeepSeek is out of China. So it's a Chinese government who have funded a lot of that research. So just being aware of what information you're putting out there. And again, this is basic privacy, because for most of the apps that we are using, if you are on TikTok, it's the same thing. China's data mining is really good. So if you are active online, you probably have already had a majority of your data mined by China. So mitigating the further damage of that by keeping phones in safe places, by making sure that your young children don't have too much access to them. So there's things that you can do. But anyways, that would be my 2 cents on it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's so insightful, Emily. And it's interesting because a lot of families, like with the peaceful press, you are reading literature to your children and then you're making a timeline to go with it, or you're working on geography projects, and that's what brings it all together. So we don't use a history textbook, because then you'd be taking up the time that you have to read to your children, reading something that really isn't going to grip them. If you're reading a history textbook, they're not going to be nearly as engaged as if you read a beautiful story like Across Five Aprils or Shackleton's Endurance or The Little House on the Prairie. All of those stories bring history to life. But you can easily then, go on YouTube and look for a video about it. You could go on ChatGPT. So if you as a mom are worried about, oh, I need a history spine, or I don't really know what the events were of the 21st century, you could look up those major events. And sadly, like my son was in a history class in junior high at a local co-op, and the co-op was also kind of sponsored a by a charter school. So some kids, we weren't in a charter school, but some of the kids there were in a charter school. And so the teacher was teaching out of a charter school textbook. And I know that he was giving a more like American worldview or traditional American worldview or something, but this textbook totally glossed over communism, what Stalin did to people. And I actually I looked up who was Stalin on um, or what did Stalin do on ChatGPT? And it says an estimated 700,000 to 1.2 million people were executed, millions more sent to labor camps. So at least, he said, it says ran a totalitarian regime with intense censorship. Like, I don't trust ChatGPT, but I don't trust Google. I don't trust public school textbooks. Like, none of that is trustworthy. The most important thing for you as parents is to actually be researching this stuff yourself. Like, if you want to know what to teach your children and what is safe and what is true, you're going to have to take some time yourself to, maybe read some books. Like, I read the book by Yeonmi Park about her escape from North Korea, or a book called A Single Tear about a family who they went to China to become, part of the communist revolution. Then they got imprisoned in a labor camp. Like, if you're not reading primary sources, like actual writings of people who lived through these big economic times, or, reading the actual writings of Thomas Jefferson, the actual writings of, people in, founding fathers, you're going to still be at the mercy, whether it's a textbook or whether it's ChatGPT. You're going to really be at the mercy of modern interpretations of history. So, this is why in the Peaceful Press, as much as possible, we use primary sources. Like, even in the Playful Pioneers Volume 2, we read the Mayflower Compact. So you can see, like, what did the Puritans, what were their ideals for coming to America? Yes, there were some messy things that happened, But if you can read what the people actually said, it's going to be easier for you to, maybe explain, okay, here's some worldviews that were shared at the time that we don't necessarily share today. But it's going to be harder to villainize people who weren't necessarily villains, but rather people just living in a different time period than we live in. This is why, once again, just we have to be reading real books, particularly books that were written in different time periods. Because if we're only reading modern versions, like this is another thing. Emily and I went to the Orchard Museum, or Orchard House, which is Louisa May Alcott's home in Boston area. And it was, this is a Christian podcast. I'm sure you guys know that I'm not like a big raging feminist. And, so it was basically about Louisa May Alcott, who loved her family so much that she devoted her family basically, or her life basically, to writing books to provide for her family. And in some ways, the tour director of that museum made out that she was like a raging feminist, that she was there were things that said that didn't actually seem true to her books. Like going back then afterwards, I was like, I'm going to read a little bit more of her writings and see, what is more true. And so it is important for us to be reading books from primary sources, reading lots of books as adults. If we want to be able to teach our children, then we need to kind of know what we're teaching. And this can happen as you grow. Like when you're teaching preschool, your kids aren't going to have these big questions. It's going to be easier. Just teach them from the Bible, read fairy tales and Aesop's fables. We include that in the Precious People. You're not necessarily going to need ChatGPT for a bunch. But as your kids get older and they're maybe researching a career, today my son took a practice ASVAB test. And then I went on ChatGPT and asked, can you help us study for the ASVAB? There are things like that ChatGPT could actually, or another AI could actually really help us with. But Emily, I think one of the big things that people are really worried about isn't just like, is it information? Is it storing my information? Because we all know everything we put on Instagram, everything we put online, it's all public. It's all stored somewhere by someone. But what about the future? I think what people are really scared of is like the environmental impact. I mean, how big do these servers have to be? What kind of environmental toll is it going to have? Also, the impact on jobs. Like, are our children tomorrow going to be able to find jobs if everything's automated in factories by robots?
These are questions that far smarter people are deeply divided on. And so I think it really boils down to individual research on this and sort of what matters to you. I think the energy cost is significant. And so if you are deeply concerned about the environmental impact of the energy, then that would be a good reason to stay away from it. I think it's one of those hard things, though, where I was listening to this podcast and it was with Peter Thiel, and he was talking about how in the 70s and 80s, when we were cleaning up our water, when we were having these huge, like back to the earth, environmental forward movements, it was actually at the cost of progress. And so progress is now generally viewed as something damaging to humans. And because of that, we now, rather than saying what progress can we make to make our progress even better, i.e., how can we create energy sources that are cleaner and more self-sufficient than anything we currently have, and who will be the next scientist to develop that? We have this sort of scarcity mindset that says there's not going to be a better solution to solve the problem that a new solution has created. And I think it's really important to dream technologically and to believe that there is innovations that are good. I think AI, for one thing, it's not AI. Like I'm doing work. I'm actually at my other job. My project is training an AI to do legal document reviews. And I'm also doing some side projects. And those side projects, every time I research, every company out there is like, use our AI. We have a AI assistant. We have an AI this and AI that. And I'm dying because I'm like, it's not AI. It is a barely functioning chatbot. And that's all it is. And I understand like the technological side of AI. I understand there's more going on than just an upgraded chatbot. But for one thing, humans are irreplaceable, and we have to believe that. Um, for two, I think a lot of the functional jobs, like I have seen a lot of information about coding not being a job of the future. So if you're a high level coder, then you will have a future job, because the creativity necessary to develop new code can't be mastered by a machine, which is only capable of solving problems based on pre existing information. So those jobs will not go away. But if you are a basic analyst or a basic mathematician or a basic coder, like the kind you could get from a workshop or a tech school, those jobs are going to go away if AI continues to develop and if solutions are found for its energy consumption. And so being aware of that and realizing that this is actually a time not to let your children's brains go to sleep, but to really, really raise children who are aware of the fact that they offer something with their creativity, with their out of the box thinking that machines will never replace. And the other thing is they found when computers started playing chess, so the best computer could beat the best human at a certain point, right? And then they did these studies where they combined a human and a chess player. So like a grandmaster chess player and a human, or sorry, grandmaster chess player and a computer, and no computer could beat this human computer combo. And so again, there is creative thinking that a computer, that an AI cannot replicate. And that is one of the reasons why reading really good literature, like I'm reading I'm gonna blank on the name. I think it's called The Circle, and it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and it's one of his earlier books about Soviet Russia and the Gulag system. And this one's kind of unique because it's not necessarily about the gulags themselves or the Gulag itself, or the work camps, but it's about a special technology camp. And so it's all these engineers and scientists and sort of professor types who were sent off for, made up crimes, and then gathered together to invent this decoder on the telephone. So it's a super special lab. And basically they found that the intelligent people they had shipped off to prison. But like any good Russian author, Solzhenitsyn has these fascinating conversations between the Zeks, as they were called. And just reading these ideas and the way that fitting a story together and following the various pieces of it and being captivated by storylines that are intermingling and coming together and cross references and then the way that these people from different times create ideas and present philosophies is stimulating my brain, and it's making me think about things in different ways, which is one of the reasons why having children read great literature, and hard literature is really important in a future with AI.
These are such good reminders. And it's interesting because years ago I was sitting down with a filmmaker and I asked her, like, if my kids want to make movies someday, what is the most important thing they should do? And she said, oh, they need to read good stories. And I think that a story-based childhood where you are reading great books out loud to your children, you're listening to them, you're talking about them, is the best way that you can prepare your children for success in the future, for a future that we really can't understand right now. We don't know what it's going to look like, but having great stories and teaching them virtue, like if children don't know right from wrong, they're going to be not part of the solutions in the future. And so teaching children virtue, which is a big focus on what we're doing this year in the Restoration Home community, teaching children to be able to think for themselves, giving them even just the processing time. I think that in traditional schooling, there's so much time spent on worksheets and filling in the blanks, basically figuring out the answer the teacher wants you to have and then writing it down, and not nearly enough time of just thinking and reading something and then having time to play and kind of process what you learned, instead of constantly having all your time be organized by somebody else. Also, teaching children to work. Like we talked about this on a recent podcast. If your children don't know how to, clean up after themselves, how to mow a lawn, how to, do some basic life skills. And these are some of the things that we work on in the Restoration Home community, in the Peaceful Press curriculum. Those resources include so many hands-on activities that will help your children. I just recently wrote a blog post about engineering because I was building bunny ears or a little bunny mask from the Peaceful Preschool with my grandchild. And then I used cardstock for the ears, and then they were too heavy, so they were flopping over. So then we used popsicle sticks to prop them up. And I was like, oh my goodness, we are engineering. Like, yes, this is not a rocket ship, but it is a basic engineering project. And if you start doing those kinds of projects with young children, then by the time they are going into the high school years, they'll have such a good foundation of knowing how things work and knowing how material works and knowing what goes together. So they could be part of these solutions in the future and have a good foundation, not just of the science. It's interesting because many of the innovators, like the founders of Google, went to Montessori schools, and Montessori schools really emphasize a lot of doing, hands-on work, manipulating things, moving things, having some choice about what you do, but not, they don't as much emphasize virtuous stories. And so I think that's what we really need to have is this combination of beautiful virtuous stories and hands-on work and projects to develop people who will be virtuous in the future and be able to have the solutions to big problems instead of being part of the problems.
I agree. And one last thing I would say, as we're moving into a more technological world, it's so important that we are pursuing human connection, human connectivity, and community. And I think most homeschool families are good at it, but really prioritizing it, because I do think that there's a possibility that there will be a future in which you can have an artificial intelligent companion, which in some ways would be really incredible. Like if you had a family member who had maybe some learning disabilities that made it hard for them to live on their own, and they had an AI companion who could remind them of things like, did you lock the front door? Did you turn the stove off? Like kind of have almost like a dementia assistant. Do you know what I mean? Where you have this, it could radically change the quality of life and the freedom that certain people can experience. And I think there's things like that that are actually kind of cool to think about and imagine happening. But at the same time, as our world becomes more and more technological, solutions become more individualistic and we have less of a need for one another. And so raising children where you are stopping to help that neighbor across the road, where you are not afraid to put yourself out in community. And this is totally unrelated, but I know so many people now who have social anxiety, and even more so after COVID. And I was laughing about it with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how going somewhere new experiences are stressful. And so just making sure that as technology changes and as we become even more independent, as technology is a greater tool for our self-reliance, that we are building and maintaining community.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder, Emily, to just kind of continue focusing on real life. I think that that's one of the messages, and one of my friends in our Restoration Home group who kind of had an objection. I think a lot of people, they just don't want to see humanity disappear. Do you know what I mean? The joy of gathering for a meal, the joy of serving in a community, the joy of growing a garden, all of these things are important for our nervous system, they're important for our mental health, but also as believers, as people who are created in the image of God, we were created to be relational. We were created to, it says love one another, for love is of God. And so, remembering to continue loving each other and continue investing in each other, being in community is such an important part of navigating sort of an unknown future. And then back to your point about, how AI could be helpful to some people. My daughter, or your younger sister, she's got a processing disorder, and so she hasn't been able to get a job. She, struggles with communication, and she's been slogging her way through college, trying really hard, even though she has this major processing disorder. So it makes it really hard to come up with ideas on her own. But actually, ChatGPT has been helpful in some ways for being able to, like, she was working on an art project, and she was able to input something, a picture maybe, and ask for ideas for this new picture that she needed to make. Or, she's been able to ask, like some of her responses that she has to make in college discussion groups, she's able to get some help with because of an AI. And so I can totally see how that could be helpful to someone. And thank God, our daughter's in a family and we are all supporting each other in this family. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. And it is wonderful to think about, like, how could we end homelessness? Like maybe our children, or some invention that your children come up with, could help end homelessness. Or what are some of the problems in the world that we could actually have a part in solving? So I'm really grateful for this conversation, Emma. I'm sure it'll be really provoking for people and give people a lot to think about. But I would just encourage you, start with a resource like the Playful Pioneers or the Peaceful Preschool, where you're reading beautiful books with your children, you're sharing experiences with them, and then move on to some of these deeper resources like the Kind Kingdom Volume 2, where we read books like Treasures in the Snow by Heidi St. John, or the Magna Carta, or move on to the Playful Pioneers Volume 2, where we're reading about the Landing of the Pilgrims, or of Courage Undaunted. Some of these deeper, beautiful books that really create a lot of conversations that show you the resilience that people in the past had, and that might just spark some of those ideas in your family. And when you purchase any Peaceful Press resource, you can use code restoration10 to save 10% on that purchase because you're a listener. Thank you so much for listening to the Restoration Home podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can send us a message at hello@thepeacefulpress.com. You can leave a review. We love reading reviews, and subscribe and share.